Hi everybody, this is Joy at Pine Quilt Shop. Today we're going to talk about fat quarter quilts and fat quarter patterns and give you a little bit of info on different things to consider when you're picking out a pattern to go with that latest and greatest fat quarter bundle that you just couldn't resist. So we're going to start by taking a look at some of the fat quarter projects that we have here in the shop. I have a few of them laid out. We're going to start with Boxan. This is a wonderful pattern from one of my favorite designers, Sew. It is layer cake and fat quarter friendly, and the one nice thing that we see with a lot of the fat quarter patterns is that they come in a variety of sizes. So you get size options with many of your fat quarter patterns. So this one has a crib, a throw, a twin, and a queen. It was marked as layer cake and fat quarter friendly. I'm going to show you the throw here in a second. We have that kitted, and it used 10 fat quarters or 35 10-inch squares. So the one thing to keep in mind with patterns that are designed to use multiple types of pre-cuts is that the image that you see on the pattern jacket may have been done with another type of pre-cut, not the one that you're planning to use. So do keep that in mind. Sometimes with a pattern, they will have done it with layer cakes instead of fat quarters, but the pattern is written where you can use either one. So the image on the front might look scrappier than what you get when you use fat quarters. We'll take a look at another project here in a second. But this was done with fat quarters. This project is a great one to highlight some of your larger prints. So if you have some fun big prints in a fat quarter bundle, Boxan is a great pattern to highlight those larger prints. And it has a nice amount of a consistent sashing color. So you have some consistent color to kind of tie everything in the quilt together. So that is Boxan. We opted to do that in fat quarters, even though the pattern gave the reartist requirements in either fat quarters or layer cakes. Now, the second project that I'm going to show you is right behind me, and it is this pattern called Planted. And you'll notice here, you can see a very distinct diamond shape. And when I show you our quilt, you're going to see it looks a little different because we opted to make it scrappy instead of using a consistent fabric in the center and the outside of each block. This also comes in multiple size options. This one has 5 size options, so everything from a youth to a throw, twin, queen, all the way up to a king. Now what I'm going to show you is the throw. I want you to notice one thing about this pattern. Now we kitted the project behind me with 10-inch squares, so it has 36 different layer cake squares in it. If you opted to do this with fat quarters, you could, and the pattern is written to use either one, but now you go from 36 to 12, so you would end up with a much less scrappy project. So when you're picking out fat quarter patterns, especially if you find you have patterns that call out the yardage in fat quarters plus other types of pre-cuts, make sure you look at the image and are okay with the variety of fabrics that you're going to get, because this one, like I said, has 36 different fabrics. We opted to piece it scrappy. My sample maker pieced it scrappy as well, and it has 36 different fabrics in it. So if you did this with fat quarters, it would look different unless you went ahead and threw extra fat quarters in the mix, which you certainly can do, but you would only have 12 different fabrics if you opted to do this as a fat quarter quilt, following the directions exactly as they're written in the pattern. So keep that in mind when you're picking patterns. Sew, though, is one of my favorite designers. They have wonderful patterns. They're very well written, and she many times will call out the requirements in fat quarters, layer cakes, sometimes even charm packs, layer cakes and charm packs, depending on what the pattern is. So she has great patterns. The next pattern that I'm going to show you is a favorite one that we've kitted many times. It comes from Lori France here in Minnesota. She is the designer behind bean counter quilts, and this is one of my absolute favorite fat quarter patterns anytime we have just fun directional fabrics. This has a smaller version and a larger version. What we're going to show you is a larger version, and it is kind of hands down my go-to pattern when we have a lot of fun directional prints in a fabric collection, and we really want to let those fun directional prints shine. It is a perfect pattern. It's easy to keep everything right side up when you're making Life is Good. Great for big prints as well, like Boxan. It's got some big areas for those big prints to go ahead and shine, and it is a wonderful fat quarter pattern, especially for the directional and large prints. Great choice for that. And we have kitted this one many times here in the shop, and that is Life is Good. One fun thing too, when we've kitted the baby size pattern, she has in the directions an option to run chenille it along those sashing rows, so you can add a little texture to a baby quilt, which is kind of fun. So when you're picking out fat quarter patterns, along with looking at the number of pieces, the variety of fabrics you're going to have in there, the size of the pieces, and how well does that fit the scale of the fabrics in the fat quarter bundle you're trying to use, you also want to think about how does the pattern come together. Does it have sashing like the one in front of you does? Has the little frames in the box up. I've got a couple other patterns here that also have quite a bit of sashing in them. This one has sashing between all the fabrics, and those factors make it easier or harder sometimes to make a fat quarter bundle work with the pattern that you're looking at. Aurora uses a fat quarter bundle. The pattern image was done with Secret Garden. This one just comes in one size, but it's got a consistent pieced star and diamond and that white sashing, so you've got some consistency in the mix. Works well to usually use some solider pieces for that, and then a great way to highlight the fat quarters. Glowing is from Quilty Love. She's another wonderful pattern designer that has some great fat quarter patterns, and this one has, again, you know, background and sashing between the blocks. So when you're working with a pattern like this and you're looking at your fat quarter bundle, you need to find 3 that work well together, that have good contrast with each other. So sometimes one like this can be easier to work with because you don't end up with a lot of different fabrics touching each other. You only have to worry about those 3, and then you've got that sashing to separate. These 3, do they have contrast? So when you're mixing and matching your fabrics, it sometimes is a little easier to do that if you don't have to worry about the fact that this one fabric can touch 10 other fabrics. Here it can only touch basically the background and 2 other prints. So it's a little easier to plan your fabrics and make sure that you're getting good contrast. The other pattern designer that I love for fat quarter patterns is Kitchen Table Quilting, Erica Jackman, and she has some wonderful fat quarter patterns. This one, like I said, has some sashing throughout, so it gives you some continuity between some of the pieces that could have been done all in one fabric if you had chosen to do that. It actually uses fat quarters for it. We'll flip that one over and show you here in a sec. The penny quilt from Erica Jackman, this one has sashing in between all the fabrics. So if you have fabrics that don't have great contrast with each other, you can use them in a quilt like this, as long as you make sure you can find a sashing fabric that they have pretty good contrast with. So that is one thing to keep in mind with a pattern like this. The fabrics aren't touching each other, they're only touching the sashing, so you have, like I said, just one thing to kind of worry about, having contrast with everything else. The Judy quilt, we're going to show it to you on the wall. I need to show it to you first. You can see it in fabric, but that is the Judy quilt done in fabric. Now we have opted to add 2 additional borders to this quilt. So there are 2 optional borders on it, an inner and an outer, that we added to this quilt. The pattern as written is just the center. We are finding so many patterns these days. It's a trend in patterns to do borderless quilts. We see a lot of them, especially it seems like in the fat quarter patterns. I see so many fat quarter patterns that are borderless patterns. It's kind of nice because it leaves you free to do what you would like to do. You can add a border, you can add 2 borders, you can make them as wide as you want to try to get the quilt to the size that you are looking to have it end up. So it kind of is nice. It leaves things open for you to make the quilt your own and decide how you want to finish it up. So let's take a look at the Judy quilt. This one is interesting. It is listed as being, so it has baby lap and twin sizes, and it's listed as fat eighth and fat quarter friendly. So let's flip this over and take a look. So the baby size is using fat eighths, and fat quarters. The lap size is using fat eighths or fat quarters and fat quarters, so the various fabrics. And then you've got a little bit of consistent yardage. And then when you get into the twin size, they call it out in fat quarters or half yards, which should basically be the equivalent of 2 fat quarters. So you will see that with some of the fat quarter quilts where they call it out in fat quarters. Sometimes it'll be called out in fat quarters or regular quarters. Sometimes they can make both work. It depends on the pattern. I like the patterns that are marked clearly, though. It's just easier for customers when they're shopping if they put a marking on the front. The next one we're going to show you is Modernly Morgan, and you see how she has them all clearly marked: fat quarter and scrap friendly, fat quarter friendly, jelly roll fat quarter and scrap friendly. So it's nice when the designers do that. Modernly Morgan is another one of my favorites. I like the fact that she just does her pattern covers in solids. I think it's easier for a lot of people to envision the pattern in other fabrics when it's just done with solids like that. She has some very fun, interesting, different designs, and many size options always with her patterns as well. They usually start with baby and they go up to some bed size, queen or king, or at least a full on all of her patterns. So you get a lot of versatility when you buy one of her patterns to use it for a lot of different things. Now, when we look at her patterns, you see a variety of different designs and various things that need to be considered with these patterns. With Cosmic Crush, for example, you have kind of like 4 sections that surround the star, almost make a secondary star and background. Now, this one, if you did a light background, you would need to make sure that you could see all of those outer star points well. So when you're looking at a fat quarter bundle and trying to make it work with a fat quarter bundle that you already have, think about, are you going to have a consistent background fabric like that? Are you going to make it light or are you going to make it dark? Many times patterns are going to show you, generally, you're going to see more that are going to show it with a light background than a dark background, but you can flip that. How pretty would that be if that was done with a black background and then lighter or some super saturated, super bright fabrics for the stars? It would be a completely different look. But consider the fact that you can change the background fabric from a light to a dark. But if it is a light, you may need to take a look at your fat quarter bundle, and if it's a full collection bundle, there are probably going to be some light fabrics in there. And sometimes you do have to take and set those aside and save them for another project. You may not be able to use them. But again, this is one where you have 4 fabrics working together, so it sometimes is easier to coordinate your pieces. Here you have a lot of fabrics in the black. Here you have a lot of fabrics in the black. And if you're working with a collection, you will frequently find that there will be multiple fabrics that have the same base color. So it's a different print. Maybe it's a large flower and a small flower, but they're both printed on the same pink base cloth or the same purple base cloth, whatever it might be. So when you're working with fat quarter quilts, or any quilt really, where you have fabrics like that in the mix, especially if you're doing you know, patterns where a lot of those fabrics are ending up next to each other, you do want to make sure that as you're putting your blocks together, that you're planning and you're moving those around and you're not getting two pinks right beside each other, because you'll have a more pleasing result in your quilt if there's contrast between them. And if those fabrics have that same base background color fabric to them, they tend to not have good contrast when they're placed right beside each other. So keep that in mind when you're putting any quilt together, or a fat quarter quilt, especially though if you are working with a fat quarter bundle that's a full collection bundle, you may need to sometimes set aside some of the lights or some of the darks if they don't have enough contrast with your background fabric. And then if it is a collection bundle, you are going to have those similar pieces. So plan that, make sure you're moving them around as you start to put your blocks together, so that they're not ending up side by side. So that is what we had for some tips and tricks today. Is we wanted to show you some of our favorite fat quarter patterns. Hopefully will inspire you to pull a fat quarter bundle out of your stash, or to pick up another one that you see that you just can't resist because they're so pretty. We love fat quarter bundles here in the shop. They're so fun to make, and they are just they're one of those things that if you're not sure what you're going to make yet, you can grab a fat quarter bundle and you can usually always find a pattern later. So hopefully we gave you some great ideas for patterns that you can pick up that will work well with some of the fat quarter bundles in your stash and some of the new ones you might be considering buying. Thanks for joining us today.